again, I am back today talking about Rollerdrome, which, it's been a while. I think it's been a couple of months since I last made a video, or at least published one. But yeah, I sort of thought with me, I've got a written review that you can go and check out. I thought, why not have an audio version to go alongside it? And yeah, so Rollerdrome I guess I called it a roller skating action game. Developed by Roll7, who are the developers of the Olli Olli game series. They've done 2 games for that, and then they've done Olli Olli World, which I think came out, I think it was maybe back in February or something. And Rollerdrome is kind of an evolution of that kind of gameplay, but this time it's 3D, and it's, got 360-degree control of the player character. And much like Olli Olli, the kind of part of the goal here is pulling off tricks and showcasing style and things like that. But the kind of spin on this is that it's part of this kind of very dangerous, highly lethal sport that is called Rollerdrome. And the idea of the core of the game is where you've got to eliminate all these enemies with guns while you're pulling off all these tricks. And it's honestly impressive because I'm surprised no one has made a game like this. So, before. This feels like such a concept that could have existed or should have existed, and yet it just hasn't. But I guess early thoughts, this to me is no doubt a surefire contender for year-end awards. This is, I think, as I'll get into, one of my favorite games this year. And so, to kind of give an idea, the core of the gameplay combines these roller skates and the guns. So obviously your roller skates are your movement tool, and the guns are obviously what you use to fight enemies with. And the whole point of each level is to eliminate all the enemies without dying, essentially. And obviously each level gets progressively more difficult as different enemies. But a core element of the game is the ammo is really scarce, and the way you get ammo back is by executing dodges and completing various tricks. And obviously there's a whole plethora of different tricks you can pull off, and I think different complexity equals more ammo back, essentially. But it's tuned so well that you're kind of both in and out of the combat and the tricks at the same time. And obviously it's, the game moves so fast that you're kind of constantly, there's never a stopping point. It's very, fast and frenetic. And it plays so well. It's got basically a near perfect, control scheme and animation. And I think it's one of the most seamlessly flowing games I've played. It just feels so good to play. And every time you start a level, it's kind of this rush of adrenaline, because you're like, oh my god, you're playing, you're back in that loop again, and it's really good. And what makes it better is that, at least as I was playing, you kind of learn more and you kind of try different tricks. And if you're following the challenges like I was, since some of the challenges require you have to unlock some of the later levels, you have to complete so many challenges from the previous set of levels or whatever. And, that was, some of them were oh, you need to pull off this trick, or you need to do this thing. And so as I was looking at those and also checking some of the menu, I was kind of learning a few more moves that were a little bit more complex. And then I was trying to string together as much as I could all at once. And it sort of feels where you really start, kind of when you start, you're oh, okay, you learn the basic controls, and by the end, you're kind of in this, seamless flow of just, pulling off tricks, zipping past enemies, jumping in the air, spinning around, and it feels so good to play. And the cool thing is there's a pretty high skill ceiling as well, so if you're someone who likes the hardcore kind of, difficult elements of games, you can chase leaderboard scores. There's challenges, obviously, as I said, and there's a higher difficulty version of the campaign, once you beat it, that you can play. And then if you're on the other side of that, if you want a lighter challenge, there's a bunch of assists that you can enable, which can change the game speed and reduce damage. And that does, it reduces, I think you can't earn leaderboard scores with that, but it's good if you want to practice, or if you just kind of want to get used to the flow and kind of work your way up, sort of thing, or if you just want to make the game kind of a bit easier overall, kind of thing. And so, one thing I was thinking about is that to make this game feel so good, that the game is fast-paced as it is, it's not always moving at that high speed, because to kind of execute a game where you're moving at that high speed and you're pulling off tricks and you're killing enemies, that feels like it's so much going on, it'd get a bit messy and it wouldn't play too well. And so to make up for this, there's an auto-aim mechanic for the hit scan weapons, and then there's also a rechargeable slow-mo aim that you can do that lasts for a few seconds and has to recharge for a few seconds. And this kind of allows you to kind of do drive-by shooting just without kind of aiming properly. You can kind of do that, but that is rare because most of the time you're in and out of like the slow-mo aim, then you're dodging, and then you're back doing tricks, and you flow back and forth between these two as you're taking on these different enemies. And having those two live in their like own avenues just helps pace the action really well. And as a result, I mean, slow-mo always feels good in games, but when you get this like perfect level of animation, the game feels so satisfying to pull off all these tricks. And there's times where you go up in the air and you're like spinning off a wall, like a wall running, and then you jump off, and then you're doing a trick, and then you're going into aiming, and then you can dodge, and I think you can dodge at any time. So even if you're in the air, you can dodge like certain attacks, and you just get like it's such a dynamic game that's just it never stops moving, kind of thing. Very, very very fast paced, and it's especially when you get in the harder sort of levels towards the end of the game, that really it comes to a head. And what makes it's not just as simple as like, oh, killing enemies, blah blah blah. There's obviously different weapons, but certain weapons are more effective against some of the enemies. And so paired with environmental hazards like explosive barrels and your own kind of traversal, you're kind of like constantly thinking, what's the best? Where am I going? And there's so many decisions you make on the fly that's I think people watching, maybe I don't know, maybe would realize, but when you're actually playing it, you're going through like one, thinking straight, like, I'm doing this trick, and then okay, I'm gonna go over there, and then I'm gonna jump off the wall, and then I'm gonna slow down, and it's really impressive, honestly. And having so much going on, but yeah, it feels so good, and it feels so fair and challenging. It's great, honestly. There are times where the difficulty does get a little bit. It feels like unfair, like certain things. Like usually when you're getting attacked by like a sniper or something, it'll be like the laser sight or whatever that you'll see will be red, and then it'll flash white, and that's when you can dodge, and then you can do a perfect dodge, and that gets you more damage and slow mo. But sometimes attacks weren't doing that white flash a couple of times, and that kind of made it feel a little bit kind of, I don't know if unfair is the right word, but it kind of hinders the experience a little bit. But that was few and far between. By and large, this game is just extremely fun, very challenging towards the end, but fair. And I think one aspect, or another aspect, that kind of makes this game stand out even more is that this game doesn't look like a lot of other games. It has this like comic book style, like art style, and to me personally, that's not something I think about very often. But I often, same with Borderlands, I don't usually think I want it, and then I play it, and there's actually something quite appealing about it. And it's nice to have a game look so unique and different in what can be a sea of very similar looking other games. And to add to that kind of presentation, and what kind of adds, like, so you got the art style, and you got the gameplay, and you got this like really great flow. What kind of emphasizes this even more is the soundtrack, which is honestly just such a good soundtrack. Like it's genuinely one of my favorite soundtracks I think in a long time. And I've basically, as I've been writing my review and just all this past week, I've basically just been listening to it, and it's kind of like the synthy. Uh, it's very, yeah, I think synthwave is maybe where they're going for, but it's not really what I expected, but yet it feels so perfect for it. Uh, and the game doesn't even necessarily look. I mean, it looks futuristic and there's futuristic elements, but it doesn't look like it's like cyberpunk kind of game, But the soundtrack just works really well. And then the aspect to me that I think kind of cements my love for this game is the narrative. Now, you can play this game and completely ignore the story, and you can just jump straight in and ignore it all and play the game as it's intended, the gameplay. But there's a lot of there, I mean, I'm not going to go too deep into spoilers, but if you don't want to know anything about this kind of side of the game, then you can skip to whatever timestamp somewhere a bit later, or skip towards the end. Well, with my verdict, I'll probably put a timestamp on the screen or something. Um, but there are first-person segments of the game where you're just walking around these different areas, reading notes, inspecting different things, overhearing conversations, and it's in here that you can kind of discover different elements of a story that's going on in the world building and some, I guess, lore of what's going on. And the game, again, as I said, you can ignore all of it, but if you spend the time to read it all and kind of look through things, you start coming up with like a theory, and you can start theorizing about what's actually going on here. And the game feels very isolated. When I was playing it, I was like, there's something very quiet about this game. Despite the action being so loud and over the top and bombastic, the story and those in between sections are very quiet. For you're on your own, And I go more in depth in this in an article, or like a bit of it's a fairly short article, but still sort of more in depth. That I'll link in the description if you want to read more about that. But it's very intriguing, and I guess the core of it is it's basically about a conglomerate that's trying to control the media and control the news, and they're kind of using Rollerdrome, this kind of event, this sporting event, as the way to do it. And there's so much going on in this, and so much kind of just layering to this game that just, to me, I think really just it's the cherry on top for everything on this game. Um, and so yeah, so overall, I've got to say that I think Rollerdrome is a must play. Like you've got to play this one. It's very fun, very much like an arcade game, and that's like the core of it. It's got the just near flawless gameplay. It's basically just perfect. It feels so good to play. And then if you want to delve deeper into what's going on in this world, you have this really thought-provoking aspect within the exploration, and this kind of like this world building, and trying to theorize what's going on and find it out for yourself. And piecing that together, like I had theories about it as when I came to write my review, but I was like, to double check and to kind of like just look at what else I can find. I reloaded the game and I looked at pretty much all the story aspects, and I found even more, and it just cemented what I had my kind of predictions and kind of understanding and perception of what was going on. And it's honestly super fascinating. And they even contextualize the higher difficulty version of the campaign, which I just think is like stuff like that is great. Um, so yeah, this game, one of my favorites this year, probably my game of the year at the moment. I played Ghostwire Tokyo was probably my game of the year before, but I think this might just take over that now. And still got a few more games to come this year, so we'll see if that changes. But yeah, so far, Rollerdrome probably my favorite game this year. But yeah, that's it, I suppose. Not much else to say. Well, there's a lot more to say. As I said, you can check out my sort of analysis article that I'll link in the description. But really interested to know how this pans out towards the end of the year with the Game Awards and things like that. Just any kind of award show or any kind of website that's sort of giving out awards. See where it lands. I'm also curious to know what other people think of this. And it's on, if you've got PlayStation Plus Premium, there's a trial of that, and I believe it's still on sale. I could be wrong, but I think it's on sale, like 30% off. So definitely worth checking out if you've got the if you want to make use of that offer or whatever. And I think it's on PS5 and PC and a PS4 as well, I think. But yeah, great game. Highly recommend it. And that's it for now. I will talk to you later. Hope you've all been well, and let me know what you think and if you check it out. And yeah, talk to you later. Ciao, ciao, ciao.